Chapter 19. Read and cry, Lando said, laying his sabacc cards down on the table. 23. A pure sabacc run. Interesting, Senator Myotamia murmured, his leathery diamolan face unreadable as he studied his own cards. I presume the reference to crying is not a literal part of the game as you play it. A pure sabacc run, you say? Yes, Lando confirmed, an uncomfortable sensation tickling at the back of his neck. The senator had made this same dramatic pause on the sabacc pot hand in exactly 5 out of the 8 complete games they'd played since the Lady Luck's hurried scramble off Silpar. 5 games that the senator had also happened to win. Unfortunate, Myotamia said, laying his cards almost daintily on the table. I have an idiot's array. I believe that wins. Yes, it wins, Lando said, shaking his head in disgust. Make that 6 out of 9. I can't believe you haven't played this game professionally, he grumbled, starting to gather up the cards. The Diamol flicked his fingers in the air. You don't truly believe the Diamala have created our vast financial and business empire for mere common sense and hard work, do you? Lando paused, half the cards still on the table, eyeing the senator suspiciously. Was he actually implying... No, of course not. Ridiculous. That was a joke, right? Of course, Myotamia said, flicking his fingers again. Common sense and hard work are all any being or species require to succeed. Luck is merely an illusion, trusted by the ignorant and chased by the foolish. With an effort, Lando fought down a flicker of annoyance. His professional gambling days were long in the distant past, but the Diamol's obvious contempt still rankled a little. So, in other words, if you're smart enough, nothing ever happens you can't anticipate? Of course the unanticipated may happen, Myotamia said, but those who are prepared can always find their way through. All by themselves, Lando persisted. They never need any help? They may, the Diamol said, unruffled. But anticipating the need for assistance is merely one more part of common sense. Ah, Lando said, nodding. So in other words, the fact that I recognize my need for extra security for my ore shipments means that I have good common sense. It may, Myotamia agreed. It could also mean... And suddenly, with a loud crack of released energy coming from the direction of the Lady Luck's hyperdrive, the mottled sky above them abruptly flowed into star lines. Lando was at the top of the circular staircase by the time the star lines finished shrinking back into stars. What is it? Myotamia demanded from behind him. Hyperdrive failure, Lando shouted over his shoulder as he all but threw himself down the stairs. If one of the couplings had failed, he needed to get the power rerouted before it started into surge instability and took out everything else on the circuit. With visions of a major repair job out here in the middle of nowhere looming before him, a repair job that would not exactly endear him to his Diamond guest, he sprinted across the dining area, past the cabins, and skidded to a halt in front of the engineering control panel. And frowned. There were none of the glowing red lights that would have indicated major systems failures, or even the blinking red status lines pointing to minor system failures. In fact, according to the displays, the hyperspace dropout was simply the normal automatic response of close planetary approach. There was a duly logged note that course comparison with the nav computer indicated that no planet should be in range at the moment. Oh no, Lando breathed, leaping up the short stairway and jabbing at the bridge door release. The door slid open and he stepped through. And there it was, floating silently in the darkness directly in front of him. The all too familiar shape of an Imperial Star Destroyer. Fighting back a curse, he dived for the helm, slapping the row of emergency power boost switches on his way. He dropped into the chair, threw full power to the drive, and twisted the yacht's nose hard to starboard. Or rather, tried to twist it. Even with full emergency power, the Lady Luck wasn't moving. Or rather, she wasn't moving where Lando wanted her to go. We are in a tractor beam, the senator's cool voice said from behind him. I noticed, Lando said shortly, shifting into a sharp up-down wiggling motion. If the tractor beam operator thought his target was trying to go vertical, he might overcorrect and allow the yacht to slip the lock. But no such luck. Strap down, Lando ordered Mantabia, letting the tractor damp out the yacht's residual wiggling and taking a quick look around. The Imperials had to have an interdictor cruiser around here somewhere. Yes, there it was, off in the distance to port side, its nose pointed in the Lady Luck's direction. But not all that precisely pointed. In fact, the projected cone of hyperdrive dampening gravity waves was not even close to being centered on the tug and brake contest taking place out here. If Lando could break free of the tractor beam, there was an even chance he could get the edge of the cone and escape before the Star Destroyer could re-establish the lock. If. Call your aide on the intercom and have him strapped down, he told the senator. The Lady Luck had one last trick up her sleeve, a little something that one of Luke's exploits a few years back had inspired Lando to install. Powering up the backup proton torpedo launcher, he keyed for a Stage 3 torpedo and fired. The torpedo flashed out from under the yacht's bow, accelerating suddenly as the tractor beam yanked at it. There was a flicker from Lando's board as one of the Star Destroyer's turbolaser batteries began to track it. And then, no more than 20 meters in front of the Lady Luck, the torpedo exploded. Not into a devastating blast, but into a brilliant cloud of tractor-reflective particles. Particles that should, in theory, confuse the lock, tie up the entire tractor beam, and let him slip free. And it was working. The yacht shuddered for a moment and then jerked hard as the invisible grip was abruptly broken. Hang on, Lando shouted, turning the ship's nose hard over. If Luke's experience with the covert shroud gambit was anything to go by, he would have bare seconds to get to the edge of the interdictor cruiser's mass shadow cone before the Imperials woke up and started shooting. But even as the Lady Luck started the turn, there was a burst of light from behind the particle cloud between him and the Star Destroyer. He had just enough time to see the glittering track reflective particles turn a dull, non-reflective black, and with another jolt, the yacht was once again trapped in the tractor beam. What now? Myatamia asked. Only one thing we can do, Lando told him, his stomach tight as he shut down the Lady Luck's sublight engines. We surrender. 6 stormtroopers led the way, clumping along in perfect unison in 3 ranks of 2 each. Behind them, their softer footsteps not even trying to stay in step, strode Myatamia and his aide. Lando walked behind the 2 Diamala, obscurely glad to be in the less noticeable position in the back. Not that that spot really gained him anything. There were 6 more stormtroopers behind him bringing up the rear. Apart from a brief "come with us" from the stormtrooper commander, there had been no communications between captors and prisoners. But Lando had been aboard more than one Star Destroyer in his time, and he didn't need either an invitation or a map to know that they were being herded into senior officer country. Possibly to the intelligence officer's nerve center. Possibly even to the captain's office complex itself. He'd been unable to read the ship's ID before the Lady Luck had been drawn into the gaping hangar bay, and had been hoping against hope that this was some monstrous practical joke being played on him with one of the New Republic's captured Star Destroyers. With each passing step, with each Imperial officer or crewer who stepped respectfully aside to give the stormtroopers room, the hope faded a little further. It seemed to take forever, but finally they came to a halt at a door marked simply Secondary Command Room. You are expected, the commander said from behind Lando as the leading stormtroopers formed a guard semicircle around the door. Enter. Thank you, Myatamia said, his voice impossibly calm. The door slid open, and without hesitation the 2 Diamala strode inside. Reluctantly, Lando followed, and nearly ran into Myatamia's back as both aliens suddenly jerked to a halt. Lando caught his balance, peering between them to try to see what had startled them so much. The room was sparsely decorated, with little more than some tactical wall monitors and a double ring of repeater displays encircling a command chair in the middle of the room. Standing beside the chair was a hard-faced man wearing Major's insignia, and rising calmly from the chair itself. Lando felt his heart seize up in his chest. No, no, it couldn't be. But it was. Good day, gentlemen, Grand Admiral Thrawn said, gesturing to them. My apologies as to the rather informal method by which you were brought here. Please, come inside. The horrified moment seemed to stretch itself towards eternity as Lando gazed in stunned horror at that face. It couldn't be. Grand Admiral Thrawn was dead. He was dead. He had to be. And yet here he was. very much alive. No one had yet moved. Please, come inside, the Grand Admiral repeated, this time with an edge of command in his voice. Myatamia stirred and continued forward, his movements seemingly breaking his aide's own paralysis. Numbly, Lando followed, sensing as he did so their stormtrooper rearguard filling in behind them. That's far enough, the Major said harshly as Myatamia came within 3 meters of the outer display ring. They've been disarmed? None of them was carrying any weapons, the stormtrooper commander reported. 3 of them, Lando noted, had moved up to form a flanking column along their right. A glance over his shoulder confirmed that the commander and the other 2 had spread out along the wall behind them. A simple yet effective positioning that provided close guard while at the same time keeping the stormtroopers out of each other's crossfire. Yes, they are keeping a close eye on you, Captain Calrissian, Thrawn confirmed. After that unpleasantness at Belbringi, I've agreed to extra precautions. Not that I'm expecting trouble from any of you, of course. Of course, Lando said, turning back to look at him. It was a trick, of course. It had to be. Thrawn was dead. The Imperial Command itself had said so. And yet... You look remarkably well, Admiral, Myatamia said. I must confess to my surprise at seeing you here. Thrawn smiled faintly. My reappearance has surprised many others, Senator Myatamia, and will surprise a great many more in the days to come. However, I didn't ask you aboard merely to toast my continued health. The actual reason... How did you survive the Bilbringi shipyards? Lando blurted. The Imperial reports said you were dead. You will not interrupt the Grand Admiral, the Major snapped, taking a step towards him. Peace, Major, Thrawn said quietly, halting the other's advance with an almost languid gesture. Under the circumstances, a certain degree of shock is entirely forgivable. Yet you did not answer his question, Myatamia said. It seemed to Lando that a faint flicker of distant pain touched the Grand Admiral's face for a moment. My survival was due to a unique combination of several factors, he said. You'll forgive me if I withhold the details. But your own Imperial reports, Lando repeated. The Imperial reports said what I allowed them to say, Thrawn said, his eyes starting to flash with annoyance. It was necessary while I recovered that... He broke off. Perhaps I've misjudged you, Captain, he said, his voice calm again. And you, Senator. I assumed that when you encountered a being returned from the dead, you'd be more interested in what he had to say than the details of the journey. My mistake. His eyes flicked over Lando's shoulder. Commander, you may escort them back to their ship. Major, have intelligence confirm the current location of Ashoro Senator Dixano. Our apologies, Grand Admiral, Myatamia said quickly as the stormtrooper started forward. As you said, we were momentarily shocked, but we listen now. Thrawn lifted a hand, and the advancing stormtrooper stopped. Very well, he said. My message is quite simple, Senator. You've recently become aware that a group of Bothans were involved in the attempted genocide on Kamas. I've come to offer my aid in bringing those guilty to justice. Myatamia inclined his head to the side as if listening to a faint and distant sound. Excuse me? No, you heard correctly, Thrawn assured him, that faint smile once again touching his lips. I want to help. Myatamia twisted his head around to throw a glance back at Lando, turned back again. How? By identifying the guilty parties, of course, the Grand Admiral said. If President Gaversom truly wishes the crisis resolved, he need only ask for my assistance. A visit to Bothawui, a few minutes' conversation with each of the Bothan clan leaders, and I'll know the truth. Myatamia inclined his head to the side again. The Bothan leaders claimed they did not know which of their people were involved in that crime. Oh, come now, Senator, Thrawn said, his tone dark and cold. Do you really expect they would say anything else? Myatamia seemed to digest that. And you believe you could learn the truth merely by speaking with them? The glowing red eyes glittered. Yes. There was brief silence. Would it not be simpler for you to merely locate the proper Imperial records and give them to us? Of course it would, Thrawn said, and such a search is already underway. But the Imperial Records Library on Bastion is quite extensive, and the process could take weeks or even months to complete. He cocked a blue-black eyebrow. I don't believe you have that much time to spare. You seem convinced that the New Republic is facing a serious crisis, Myatamia said. We have weathered other such crises in the past. Your confidence is admirable, Thrawn said, leaning back slightly in his seat. But I'd advise that you relay my offer to the rebellion leadership before rashly and unilaterally rejecting it. I never stated that I rejected your offer, Grand Admiral, Myatamia said. Thrawn smiled. No, of course you didn't, he said, his tone far more knowing than Lando found comfortable. I would like nothing more than to continue this discussion, Senator. It's been a long time since I've had the pleasure of debating a trained Diamalan mind, but I have other matters to attend to, and you have a message to deliver. Commander, escort them back to their ship. Goodbye, Senator. Captain. A question, Admiral, if I may, Lando said quickly as the stormtroopers came up behind him. His mind was finally starting to unfreeze, and if this was a trick, this might be the only chance they'd have to unmask it. I saw you once from a distance while you were in the company of the smuggler Talon Card. Can you tell me where that was and why you were there? Thrawn's face hardened. If this is a test, Captain, you've chosen your topic unwisely. I spent a great deal of time during my recovery considering the proper payment to be exacted from Talon Card for his many betrayals. I do not like to be reminded of him, except to consider how short his remaining life is going to be. That message you may deliver. I see, Lando murmured, closing his mouth firmly. His reckless and odds-playing youth were far behind him, and the expression on Thrawn's face was definitely the kind that discouraged further questions. Once again, though, Myatamia was not so easily put off. Yet you do not answer his question, he pointed out. The glowing red eyes shifted to the diamol, and for a single awful moment Lando thought the Admiral was going to have the three of them gunned down right there and then. But to his relief, Thrawn merely smiled. The Diamolan mind, he said, his voice utterly calm again. My apologies, Senator. He looked back at Lando. You're referring to my meeting with Card at his base on the planet Merkur when I was searching for Luke Skywalker. You and someone else, General Solo, I assume, watched our landing from within this forest. Lando felt a cold chill run up his back. You knew we were there? I knew someone was there, Thrawn said. As I'm sure you know, select stormtroopers have extra sensor equipment built into their helmets. One of them caught a reflective glint from the macro binoculars you were using. Yet you did nothing, Myatamia asked. Thrawn shrugged slightly. At the time, I assumed it was merely some of Card's people, set there to make sure my stormtroopers didn't become, shall we say, overzealous. Given the density of foliage, even a heavy blaster would have been harmless against us from that position, so I ordered that the observers be left alone. His mouth hardened just a bit. Subsequent events, of course, showed the situation to have been otherwise. Does that satisfy your curiosity, Captain? Lando managed to nod. Yes, Admiral, it does. Good, Thrawn said coolly. Thank you for your time, gentlemen, and again, my apologies for the unscheduled stop. Commander, see them to their ship. 30 minutes later, seated at the Lady Luck's helm, Lando watched as the interdictor cruiser and Star Destroyer made their synchronized jump to lightspeed. As you said, Senator, he murmured, sometimes the unanticipated will happen. I'm glad that those who are prepared will always find their way through. Myatamia said nothing. Perhaps for once he had nothing to say. Grimacing, Lando keyed the board and swung the Lady Luck's nose back on course for Coruscant. President Gaversom wasn't going to like this. Not one bit. Neither would anyone else. There hadn't been any communications planned for this point of the plan. And yet, there was Major Tierce's quarter-sized holographic image, flickering slightly above Moff Disra's private hologram pad. The transmission has been secured, Disra said, a cold blade edge of dread grinding into his stomach as he watched the encryption display. If something had gone wrong. What is it? No problem, if that's what you're wondering, Tears said. The whole operation went tech-stock smooth. I'm delighted to hear it, Disra growled. So why are you risking an open communication this way? I knew you'd be worried, Tears said blandly. I wanted to help set your mind at ease. Disra smiled sardonically, knowing the expression was probably wasted with a hollow in this size. Thank you so much, Major. I do so appreciate your concern. So our puppet performed adequately? I'd even go further and say he performed superbly, Tears said. He had them in the palm of his hand from the moment they came in to the moment they left. No surprises, then? Not really. Calrissian tried to trap him with a question about the time Thrawn visited Talon Card on Merkur. Fortunately for us, he'd actually read the detailed report I'd written up on my time with Thrawn and knew the answer. Fortunately for him, you mean, Disra said, putting an edge of threat into his voice. How soon will you be back? That's the other reason I called, Tears said. Now that we're here, I think we're going to stay in rebellion-occupied space for a while. Disra frowned, the cold blade edge starting its grinding again. What for? I'd like to nose around a bit, the other said, with a casual wave of his hand. Send activation signals to some of the sleeper groups we hadn't contacted yet. There are still a few we weren't able to send transmissions to because of distance or positioning. Mostly, I want to see what Coruscant's reaction will be to Thrawn's reappearance. Probably to send 50 star cruisers chasing in at you, Disra snapped. This is crazy, Tears. It's also not part of the plan. Military plans are always subject to change, Your Excellency, Tears said calmly. This is not what I had in mind for Flim, Disra snarled. You know that. And you know that when I joined, I said we would do better than what you had in mind, Tears countered. Disra ground his teeth savagely. You're going to ruin everything and get yourselves killed in the bargain. On the contrary, Tears said, and even on the quarter-sized image, Disra could see his self-satisfied smile. I'm going to start the Empire back on its road to glory. Tears. I have to go, Your Excellency, Tears said. We shouldn't stay on transmission too long, even with good encryption. Don't worry. I'm not planning to take the Relentless to Coruscant or anything so foolish. I just want to spend a little more time here. Call it a hunch. In my experience, relying on hunches is a fast trip to the short end of the odds, Disra growled. But Tears had him, and they both knew it. Short of sending what was left of the Braxton sector fleet to chase him down, there was precious little Disra could do at this point to countermand him. How long are you planning to stay? Tears shrugged. A couple of weeks, maybe more. It depends. On what? On whether I get the reaction I'm looking for. I'll be sure to let you know if and when that happens. Good, Disra said sourly. If and when the new Republic fleet appears over Bastion, I'll be sure to let you know. Tears smiled. Thank you, Your Excellency. I knew you'd understand. Goodbye. The image flickered and vanished. Disra leaned back in his chair, glaring at the hologram pod. This was getting out of hand. It was getting way out of hand. He'd let Terse run off the restrainer bolt long enough. It was time to reel the guardsman in a little, and remind him who was master and who was servant. At the moment, Disra wasn't exactly sure how to do that, but he'd think of something. That's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.